Thank you very much. It's a great question. And I think the report that was read by City Council really confirmed what we had heard from many people, that the shelter system wasn't as effective as it used to be, that people wanted something different. They wanted a safe place for their belongings. They wanted to be able to stay with their partner, and they wanted to be able to care for pets. And so we know that the proposal that says smaller shelters with 50 to 60 beds that have daytime space with programming and service is an ideal model, and I support that 100%. I think we have to find ways to support individuals that are facing homelessness. Now, personally, I have a brother that committed suicide many years ago, and he had mental health issues. And I often think if we could have gotten him help, he would have survived. I think many of the people that are facing homelessness just need some help, just need some support, some assistance. So I think changing our shelter system is one of the solutions that we can to help people and get them services they need sooner than later. It's how we treat people. We need to treat people with dignity and respect. I think some of the work that we've done to create primitive supportive housing places, and there's 2 in this ward that are being built, is one way that we can add more space. Until we get those primitive supportive housing units, we're not going to be able to give people primitive solutions. So we need to work together with our partners, other orders in government, in order to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. When people in the community are homeless, we see the effects on the street. We see people that are struggling, and we see Can you not hear me? Oh, sorry.
Check 1.
Sorry, thank you so much. So we're starting the time again? Okay, so when people in the community are homeless, we see the effects on the street, and we see the effects of people feeling unsafe in their communities. Let's be clear right from the start that shelters and MAT programs do not move people out of homelessness. They are often undignified, unsafe, and by no means ideal. To effectively address homelessness, we need to get to the root cause of the issue: affordability of housing, income, mental health, addictions, and trauma. Complex problems such as homelessness require collective impact, those that address the immediate needs, as well as those that work on the systemic issues as well. For example, if we build 50 houses today for 50 people that are currently experiencing homelessness, and another 50 people enter homelessness, we will still have 50 people homeless. So housing alone won't solve the problem. We actually need programs that are preventative in nature and can do rapid rehousing or housing breakdown prevention to stop it in the first place. My platform is committed to housing first, which is a proven approach to core principles of moving people out of homelessness and is a fundamental basic human right. I also believe in my platform I discuss addressing homelessness through culturally appropriate ways and getting to the root of the core causes of homelessness. Thank you so much.
Well, this is certainly unique, so I'm getting a second crack at the question. But in the context of COVID, I think it certainly exasperated the situation with homelessness. We also need to address the systemic issues that surround homelessness, such as mental health, trauma, and substance abuse. During this past year, I was able to volunteer at the Mustard Seed, and I was able to see that they are the experts when it comes to helping out the homelessness. They understand how to remove barriers to healthcare, having access to nutritional food, and seeing secured accommodations that will be suitable for people on a nightly basis. In terms of community support, as I had mentioned before, homelessness is always an issue, and the majority of people are supportive and understand it. You will always have the business owners and some homeowners that aren't comfortable, so you need to place emphasis on those groups and facilitate conversation, and the City of Edmonton should be facilitating the conversation between these groups with organizations like the EPS, 24/7, and Safe Sites. And finally, as I said, homelessness is a global issue. No standalone government can handle it on its own, so there needs to be collaboration with the provincial and federal government. What I would like to see is increased funding to the encampment response team. They are the teams that come in and they address the pollution that comes from encampments, and as well, they continue to maintain those relationships with people living on the street and offer availability to look for resources if they require it. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, homelessness has been a problem in Edmonton for seemingly forever, or as long as I can remember anyway. I've watched our city invest increasing amounts of money and try lots of different solutions, and homelessness has progressively gotten worse through those efforts. I've become disheartened to see city council members suggest that more funding from the province is the only way forward, or that's the only tool in our toolkit. I know that homelessness is a complex problem. It comes from a lack of affordable housing, a lack of living wage jobs, inadequate family and social supports, mental and health, lack of support there as well. But Medicine Hat has cured or solved, chronic homelessness in Alberta with the same amount of funding that Edmonton receives per capita from the federal and provincial governments, and I believe that a solution is within reach. I think that we need a short-term solution to avoid having to use facilities like the Shaw Conference Centre on an ongoing basis every winter, and I think that we should be leveraging partnerships with organizations such as HomeEd and Civita to try to alleviate their tax burden. So they supply affordable and subsidized housing to homeless people, and as well as people that are suffering from under-housed populations. So I want to leverage those partnerships and abate property taxes to those organizations so that they have the ability to ramp up their housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. All right, moving on to the next question, finally, now that we've sorted all of our tech issues out. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada published 94 calls to action. These actions call on Canadians and its governments to actively engage in reconciliation with Indigenous communities. If elected, what actions, if any, would you ask City Council and City Administration to support, and why? Ms. Rutherford, you will be answering first.
I want to start by highlighting that I've demonstrated my commitment to the calls to action in truth and reconciliation throughout my campaign. As a candidate, I have the land acknowledgement on my website. I marched on Canada Day instead of celebrating. I have regularly in the platforms that I've had available to me talked about the importance of reconciliation and anti-racism work in general. I've learned through my years of working with Indigenous communities and listening to elders and knowledge keepers that words are just words unless they're matched with action. The first commitment to acting upon the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, my first commitment is absolutely acting upon the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, but also acknowledging publicly the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and also making movement on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls recommendations as well. We have a lot of work to do, and at every level, and as every citizen and settler on this land. there are 9 specific calls to action that are specific to municipalities. And I would say that I want to acknowledge the City of Edmonton for the work that they have done to date. So for example, the Indigenous strategy that was recently released earlier this year is step number 45 of the calls to action, building relationships. My commitment is to keep Indigenous work at my heart, to ask questions of administration, to ensure that we're walking the path, and to make it clear to administration and council that we need to create time and space for this work. Thank you.
Ms. Rutherford. All right, Mr. Davies, you will respond next.
Naturally, when it comes to this question, the thing that council and city administration need to do is they need to listen. And they need to listen with intent and purpose. Let me repeat that again. They need to listen. The City of Edmonton has already developed an Indigenous framework that was developed, and you can access that. I think the natural next step would obviously be to incorporate some of the elements that the Reconciliation Commission of Canada put forward. I think we need to look at public training for all public employees. People should understand the history and legacy of residential schools. They should also understand conflict resolution and anti-racism. The next thing I'd like to see is commemoration. And I don't have a definitive answer of what commemoration should look like, but I would like to lean on survivors, the arts community, and Aboriginal organizations to steer that discussion. And finally, I think that all programs, resources, policies should have some type of correlation with the Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I'd like to see an evolution or a cognitive thought process that takes into consideration the accordance of this action plan.
Mr. Davies. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Zutz.
This issue is very near and dear to my heart, not just because it affects Edmontonians and constituents of this ward and all Canadians, and most importantly, the Indigenous people that have been here for tens of thousands of years, but also because my wife and 4 kids are Indigenous, and we've experienced firsthand some of the gaps, in service and opportunity, as well as casual and overt racism, in some of our government organizations and services that are available to everybody. I understand that these problems are rooted in historical, cultural, and societal barriers that make prosperity and opportunity and accessibility a lot easier for me than it does for other people that have been here a long time before us, and for my family specifically. I've read the Truth and Reconciliation report and the 94 calls to action with care because I take this very seriously. I believe that there's 11 recommendations or calls to action that do fall within the municipal government's direct influence, and about 20 to 24 that fall within either partial or indirect influence of the municipality. The city does have an indigenous framework, as Mark pointed out, and I think it's time to leverage that framework more fully so that we can make contributions to these 35 calls more urgent than the city has over the last since that report has been published. I think we owe it to the people that came before us and the people that live in our city, and I think the time is now to make progress there.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. Ms. Esslinger, you'll close out this question.
Very much. This is really an important discussion. And this week we are celebrating or commemorating the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It's on September 30th, and I want to thank the organizers for moving this event so that people have time to listen, have time to learn from one another, and to understand what really the truth is, and then reconciliation. For the city, I was very honored to understand that they have given off employees time off and that many of the city vehicles are going to be having orange ribbons to commemorate the day. That's just a beginning. The city has great plans on moving forward with truth and reconciliation, but I wanted to highlight one that I didn't see in the plan yet that I feel we need to advocate for. And that's number 66. It talks about funding for community-based organizations to deliver programs and reconciliation and a national network of information and best practices. I would like to see all our youth educated so they understand the history, they understand the truth. And the plan really speaks to opportunities for public education, for storytelling, talk about the history and the contribution of the Indigenous people, their culture and history. I think it's important that we engage youth in this work, and I imagine elders coming together with their youth and sharing their history. Nothing inspires us more than hearing those experiences firsthand. So as we move forward, I think that's how we begin to heal, by first understanding towards reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslinger. All right. Next, we're going to talk about transportation. Since the new bus network has been enacted, there have been some cracks in its implementation. What is your plan to address concerns that the bus network redesign has actually made public transit less accessible for some residents, with further walks to bus stops and less frequent service? On this question, we will hear from Mr. Zutz first.
Thank you. The bus network redesign was rolled out so poorly, I don't think it's even a divisive topic. The business case for this redesign was rooted in that our sprawling city, it becomes increasingly untenable and non-viable to provide bus services to the outskirts of the city at the levels that they expect and require. The redesign was intended to reduce the number of low ridership routes that meander through the interior of those neighborhoods and increase frequency on the outsides of those routes on more direct lines to places that we need to go. It was supposed to result in better service for most riders and longer walks for a minority of riders. But I've yet to find this majority of people that it's benefited thus far, because it's extremely negative feedback on this redesign. I think it's clear that this 5-year redesign was very expensive and has not delivered on its upside. I think a new solution is required. I am hesitant to support a full rollback to our old solution. As I mentioned before, it wasn't viable, and it's not going to suit the growing needs of our city. But I propose striking up an immediate priority of new council to form a committee to review the gaps in our current redesign and determine whether that redesign is salvageable or whether an additional redesign is required. It's unfortunate that we're in this point, but I certainly hope that it is salvageable, because it costs the taxpayers a ton of money, and it was supposed to result in some upside for us. I'd like to see that committee staffed with transit experts, advocates, users, and drivers, and work with them to determine what our next steps need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. Up next, we have Ms. Rutherford.
I've gotten so used to the mask, I forget to take it off. So one of the questions that I was asked recently in an Edmonton Journal interview was about my education and how it's relevant to work within as a city councillor. And I want to highlight here my background in human geography, because it's so on point to this topic of transportation. In the field, you learn how the built environment influences community health, how we interact, and how we live and go about our lives. So for transit, for example, we learn that distance to stops, number of transfers, reliability, and cost are all factors that increase usership or decrease usership. The bus network redesign was built on the premise of longer acceptable distances to stops and an inner and outer circle, which often increases the number of transfers. I know that we've said that COVID has also decreased ridership, but I believe that ridership would have decreased regardless with this network redesign. I've heard from hundreds of people on the doors through this campaign that they are expressing their concerns that the changes have really affected their day-to-day lives and ability to live. Seniors that can no longer get to their groceries because they don't have a driver's license anymore. It's been revoked. People that just had surgery, knee surgery, that now cannot get anywhere because they don't have ability even to drive a car because their knee doesn't work. This isn't a thing that we can wait a year to fix. It is a commitment that I make that this will be one of my first orders of business as a councillor. I've discussed in my campaign, we can't redo the whole system, but we can work within the system we have, and we can make it better right away.
Mr. Davies, you will be responding next.
I'd like to share the story of a young woman. She asked to remain anonymous, but I hope she's actually tuning in virtually tonight. She works in healthcare, and currently she lives in the community of Canosa, but she's required to walk all the way to Dunluce to catch her bus. Now consider the fact that she works odd hours. There's always a concern for connecting buses, or what about the dead of winter when it's minus 35 out and she's working a night shift? And she looked me in the eyes and she said, Mark, what the city of Edmonton put forward is a contradiction. They want to promote public usage and public transportation, but I can barely catch the bus as it is. So what I would like to see going forward is a plan that sees strength in numbers. We need to get more people that have the same narrative as this woman in front of the Edmonton Transit Service Advisory Board. Once we have the data, we can compile that into the introduction of new routes or the reintroduction of old routes. I'm excited for the step that the city took forward with the new design. Just because there's a few blind spots and adjustments need to be made should not be a deterrent going forward for this project.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. And rounding out this question, once again, we have Ms. Hesslinger.
Thank you very much. The bus network redesign was important. It hadn't been changed over 20 years. It had extensive public consultation, thousands of people provided input, and many changes were made along the way. I know in this current ward, about 25% of the changes from when it was first proposed until it was rolled out had happened. That was based on public input. And I know here at Woodcroft, we had a meeting because there was too many buses coming through the neighborhood disrupting things. And so we had a meeting. They were willing to come, and we were able to resolve some of those ridership issues where there was a decrease in the number of proposed buses coming through the community. Other communities have other challenges. It has not been without challenge, and I think the greatest thing we can do is to provide the input directly either through the councillor's office or through ETS, because I know one of the things that we did very quickly was to host a Facebook Live with the head of ETS to answer the questions that people were having. And they kept saying, if we know what your challenges are, we can plan to improve them. And many people have provided that input, and we've seen changes and that tweaking. The reality is, until we invest more money into the system, it's going to be difficult to change. We gave them the plan. You need to fix the system, but we're not going to give you any more money. That's just not practical. So I think as we come into the budget season, their priority has to be, what are we going to do to improve service? How are we going to get that information? People have been giving it to us, but it's so important for us to work together. Thank you.
Alrighty. Continuing with the theme of transportation, our next question is about cycling infrastructure. Anirniq is unequally served by cycling infrastructure. For example, cycling north of the Yellowhead without resorting to sidewalks or busy arterial roadways is difficult. What is your position on protecting cyclists from motorized vehicles throughout the ward? Ms. Esslinger, you will be going first.
Thank you. The city has embarked on a new city plan, which is embedded to be a new transportation plan. And in the plan, there is a plan for cycling, for a bike network throughout the city. That was postponed until the city plan was in place, and it's expected to come to council in early 2022. The idea is that how do we provide a cycling infrastructure throughout the city? And where is it important to have separated bus lanes? Where can you use multi-use paths? And where are the gaps? Many of those questions are answered in a new cycling plan, but some of the things that we had to look at is in the current infrastructure, we have some changes. We have a new Yellowhead coming through. We need to cross the Yellowhead CN for the LRT. So those are both opportunities to provide separated bike lanes, because coming through from the north to the south, those are some of the biggest barriers we're facing. So we're going to have to invest in those areas. And if we do it along with the other infrastructure developments, there isn't additional cost. It's part of the plan. And so that's been really important. Some of the things that we've heard from community members is they want more of the multi-use plans. But I've also heard about several gaps that are existing within the ward, and they've been documented. So I think to build the plan out, we need input from our citizens. We need to put that forward as part of the plan so we can build out into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, you'll be going next.
First, I'd like to state publicly that I am a supporter of the new reduction in speed law that the City of Edmonton put forth. I'd also like to say that I'm a supporter of the new bylaw for safe passage that will come into effect this Thursday, September 30th. I've worked as a first responder, and the majority of collisions that I have seen between cyclists and motorists could have been prevented, and speed was a factor in them. At this stage, in terms of what we need to do for the protection of cyclists, I think we need to be doing continued maintenance on the existing infrastructure. I would like to know that my wife, who travels from Woodcroft to St. Albert, can do so in a safe passage. Secondly, if we're going to be talking about continued maintenance, I think we need to talk about continued support. I think any decision going forward with the City of Edmonton should reflect the programs and resources that have been put out by the City of Edmonton. I'm a big fan of the definitive analytics that Vision Zero has put out, and we can see that there's a decrease in fatalities when we put money into cyclists, I guess would probably how I would like to wrap the question. Thank you.
Mr. Davies. Mr. Zutz, you will be responding to this question.
I support the development of safe infrastructure for cycling in high traffic areas. But as everybody knows, money is really tight, and I am hesitant to support an expanding and increasingly expensive bike network at this time when infrastructure funding is being scaled back by the province. I do not anticipate supporting the expansion of the cycling infrastructure or network over the course of my next term. There's too many other critical projects that we're going to need to reprioritize with the scaling back of that infrastructure funding from the province. And I've talked to lots of people, and I don't think that increased taxes for projects that are lower priority are a tenable solution for us. I'm running on a fiscal responsibility platform, and I think that cycling is something that's going to be very difficult to expand or deliver on in the next 4 years. But I am committed to listening to the needs of my constituents above all else. So if I've underestimated the demand for cycling, my door is always open for my constituents to have that conversation with. I'm all ears about solutions that we can enact for a small amount of dollars and on quick turnaround. But I think that the cycling infrastructure right now is prohibitively expensive, and we have other major infrastructure concerns coming up in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. And finally, we will hear from Ms. Rutherford.
I think. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. I've been clear that I support all modes of transportation. This includes cars. This includes transit. This includes active modes of transportation like walking and cycling. And this is, again, when I first started talking, I talked about how I am one of the reasons I was compelled to run is because I see so much polarization, and this is a topic that I'm seeing a lot of polarization on, and I think that there can be cohesive solutions and win-win solutions across the board on this one. Right now, the ability to bike in Ward and Inglewood is limited by connectivity across the ward. And I believe that we need better infrastructure within the ward to support a north-south connectivity, and that this can be done in a way that protects cyclists and pedestrians as well as minimizes the impacts to drivers, and is also done in a way that is conscious of the financial responsibility. So for example, as Bev Esslinger mentioned, the Yellowhead Trail Freeway Conversion Program is a program that I actually personally worked on and have a very deep understanding of it. And there is so much opportunity with that project to make sure that bike connectivity across Yellowhead, which I think is one of the biggest barriers, is integrated into the $1 billion project. I do not believe that it should cost any more money, and I believe that I would advocate for that being integrated in a way that minimizes, and I've seen the waste in that project, so I will be holding that one accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. Moving on to the next question. In 2018, City Council approved an infill roadmap. This roadmap has generally been successful at encouraging densification in the core and mature neighborhoods. However, infill projects have damaged adjacent properties due to unsafe construction practices. The amount of infill is also putting a burden on urban infrastructure. For example, some neighborhoods are falling under the per capita green space reserves targeted by city administration. Please share your position on infill development and how you would both protect the rights of adjacent property owners and balance rezoning and variance requests while maintaining the capacity of services and infrastructure in these communities. To begin on this question, we will hear from Mr. Mark Davies.
I think it's critical to know when we discuss infills and we talk about the rights of the adjacent property owners is we need to look at there is no relaxation process. The idea that any rules or regulations that are applied to somebody building a new house is also applicable to the rest of the people living in the neighborhood. I'd also like to point out that there's an inherent checks and balance within the city of Edmonton itself. Various city departments need to vet the application in order for it to be successful. And if we look at more concrete examples, such as destruction or waste that occurs on the site, I wouldn't be opposed to an auditor or a safety inspector that comes by during construction and sees that houses are in the vicinity are being taken care of. Since the question was too pointed, the second idea is how do we measure the capacity or the balance of services? And I'd like to highlight that if we don't go ahead with infills in mature neighborhoods, we are essentially not allowing the government to do its job, which is giving affordable housing. It's a good thing when you have a broad swath of properties within a community that people can purchase or buy. Finally, we need to have a 3C approach. We need communication, we need coordination, and we need collaboration with all the various departments such as Parks and Recreation, Transportation, and Drainage to make sure that the capacity of services is being fulfilled at an adequate level.
Mr. Davies, next on this question we will hear from Ms. Bev Esslinger.
Thank you. I remember when I was first elected, infill was a four-letter word that people did not want to talk about. But today, we have made many changes in the system. We have a residential construction guideline that talks about how builders are supposed to work with neighbors and what neighbors can expect. We're trying to be good neighbors. How do we build appropriately? Through the rezoning process, we're able to deal with the services, with the sewers, with is there room for the fire trucks to get by, with all the various departments, they are addressed. But it's really that relationship between the builder and the the neighbors when they're building, that's really important. And we've worked hard to build that. We also know that sometimes you need enforcement. So an infill and compliance team can come along and say what's going wrong if something's going wrong. I know many changes. I remember sending Inglewood and water because a drainage problem that was happening from an infill beside it. We've improved our systems, but there's still more to do. We do that together. One of the comments was about green space. And I know that having enough green space as we have more people in a neighborhood is absolutely essential. And through various formulas, we've seen some changes. And we need to work to ensure that green space in neighborhoods is protected. We need to have an equitable amount throughout the city, whether it's in a new neighborhood like Albany, where we're working to get the green space, or existing. Nobody wants them to be eroded. Thank you.
Ms. Eslinger. Next on this question, we will hear from Ms. Erin Rutherford.
Great. So I discuss in my platform the items mentioned here, including responsible infill, soft densification, and my commitments to the preservation of green space, such as pocket parks in neighborhoods. I also think, again, when you look at the work that we're doing, we're talking about complex things, we need to see the integrated nature of them. So, for example, preserving pocket parks and increasing our green space is both environmentally sustainable and also socially sustainable, because then you have people out using that space. I too am concerned by the damage that has been caused to adjacent properties, as well as sometimes city property, quite honestly. I believe that developers need to be accountable to these damages and incentives to be better neighbors. There's examples throughout Canada of municipalities like Toronto that have created programs where there's actually a deposit that developers need to pay the city, and if there's any damages to city property or adjacent properties, they do not get that deposit back, and that deposit goes to retrofitting or to remediating the problem. And I see that as a solution that we need to be exploring for sure. I also talk about soft densification and the benefits of that for affordability, because let's be clear, I live in a skinny home. It is not affordable for the average person. And we need to have affordable housing and not gentrify our mature neighborhoods. We need to be making sure that we are promoting garden suites, garage suites, even secondary suites as also part of that densification process, rather than knocking down and new builds. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Tyler Zutz.
Yeah, this issue of infill is obviously relevant to our ward with lots of established and mature neighborhoods. I generally believe that densification and infill strategies are reasonable. They keep our aging communities vibrant and rejuvenating and attractive places for families to live. I think without that type of rejuvenation, oftentimes communities find themselves losing schools and services due to their low population. And I think that Edmonton sprawl has caused us lots of expense from municipal service perspective. Greater Edmonton has about 1.5 million people in it, and it takes up the same land mass as Greater New York with 18 million people there. And obviously having viable and affordable services for transit and things like that are a lot more realistic when you have further densification. But I do think that we need to approach it responsibly. I'd like to see, we talked about green spaces, or the question talked about green spaces. I think that it's also important to have developed green spaces as well. They're a lot more valuable to communities than just grass fields, for example. I think that those types of investments are very worthwhile and worthy of our taxpayer dollars to increase the vibrancy and livability of our neighborhoods. One of the other issues in the question was regarding potential construction conflicts or negligence. I would propose appointing or hiring an ombuds office or person to hear and resolve those disputes independently, so that when negative externalities occur, they're not at the expense of the homeowners that had their properties damaged.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. Continuing with the theme of properties and zoning, many residents believe that rezoning applications are invariably supported by city administrators, and there's no consultation with community leagues or neighbors, even when local residents have specific concerns. Do you feel the current consultation process is adequate? If not, how will you direct city administration to revise policies and procedures to listen and incorporate concerns of local residents into their recommendations? On this question, going first, we will hear from Aaron Rutherford.
Thank you. So I want to begin by saying that how cities consult with residents on zoning changes is actually provincially legislated and fairly prescriptive. So I want to really put that up front, because if we want to see changes in that, we're actually looking at going to provincial legislation. The City of Edmonton does have one of the most robust public engagement policies and procedure documents of any city in Canada, and has even been recognized internationally for that policy and procedure. I don't think that somebody that's worked in the field of engagement within the City of Edmonton, I don't think the issue is with the policy or the procedure, but rather the practices of how it's rolling out. I believe that teams don't have the capacity, the resources, or the time to effectively engage, and that is the root of this problem. For me, the bigger issue right now on this question specifically is around the zoning bylaw renewal project, which is a huge city-changing project that will be coming forward to this new council. I worry about the level of engagement that has happened on it, and the clearly in communicating the impacts of this significant project on residents in this ward and in the city as a whole. For example, this project will reduce residential zones from the current 16 that exist down to 5 or 6, meaning even what we decide is in a zone will be really way more fluid. This project is one that I commit to doing my own engagement on, because while I think it's important to ask for administration to do that process, part of democracy is also making sure your elected representative is also engaging with you as well.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. Mr. Zutz, you will be responding next.
A large part of my platform is focused on constituent engagement, and although, as Aaron just pointed out, the sort of legislated engagement process is provincial and outside of the municipal hands, I think that residents understand that zoning changes are a part of living in a city and a part of changing the plan and looking towards the future. But I believe that personal engagement and accountability and advocacy could go a long way to hearing and empowering residents that feel ignored and passed by when zoning changes occur. We have several contentious projects occurring in the ward right now. We have homeless shelters being built in Wellington and Carlisle, and the height of apartment buildings in Griesbach has been increased from 4 stories to 6. Many of the residents feel like their questions weren't adequately answered. They weren't even listened to. So I think that is something that a engaged counselor and a counselor that takes advocacy as a priority is something that we can do to affect the engagement and trust in our municipal government. I think that needs to change, and I think increased communication by residents and developers will really affect this in a positive way, because I honestly think that if residents feel that they're heard and that their questions are answered, they don't always need to get their way in order to be satisfied. They just want to be engaged in the process, and I feel like that's not happening today.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. Ms. Esslinger, you will respond next.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question. And as already been mentioned, the zoning bylaw renewal is coming up. We need a lot of engagement in order for that to continue. Any idea that does a lot of engagement, we also have individuals doing engagement. We often have communities coming together to do engagement. I do want to make a correction. There is no shelter being proposed in Wellington. It is primitive supportive housing. And the residents had several opportunities for engagement. I know I hosted several myself through COVID through technology. There's not one in Carlisle either. There's another permanent supporting housing in Inglewood. So there's often misunderstandings. We go through the zoning process. By MGA, we need to inform residents in a certain area around rezonings. The other thing that happens, and this is new, this is what the City of Edmonton does over and above, we also communicate rezonings to community leagues. Because we're unique, we have community leagues in order for people to be engaged. Many community leagues work with us. We have many conversations about what's happening. Often developers will go to community leagues as well as the city staff, and I know that I have had several meetings on different developments as well. So I think the process of engagement is always fluid. We also find ways to improve it. We are now using technology more, but it doesn't cover everybody. In-person is still preference for many people, so we have to continue to work on making sure we hear the voices, but most of the time it's that they understand what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslinger. Rounding out this question, we will hear from Mr. Davies.
It's interesting when we talk about infills because it can be a very contentious issue. There's an element of personal feelings when you see a new house being built down or being built a few doors down from you. So what I think we need to do is something very similar to what's occurring tonight. We need to have biannual forums with developers and community leagues and residents that act on their own behalf. And what the developers need to do is they need to ask the question, if we're going to go ahead with development, where would you like to see it in the neighborhood, or where would you not like to see it in the neighborhood? Part of my platform for the last few months is the idea of innovative service delivery. It's how mobile technology is changing the way cities operate and move forward. What I would like to see is a communication app that allows for community leagues to register themselves, and they are triggered by an immediate text when a rezoning application comes forward. If we can have better sustained relationships and stronger relationships between community leagues and developers, I think it will be less contentious and more harmonious for many years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. All right, our next question concerns climate change. In 2019, City Council declared a state of climate emergency in Edmonton. What policies and practices would you put in place to combat climate change on a local level? On this question, Mr. Zutz, you will go first.
I believe that all of our levels of government need to do more to combat climate change and environmental impacts. I believe that the best way forward for our city, which is a municipal jurisdiction to do those types of things, is by improving our transit service and accessibility and costs to use transit, tightening up building codes and encouraging net zero developments. I think the city gets themselves in trouble when they pursue ideological projects such as the solar farm that's being built on the banks of our river valley, 99-acre solar farm. That solar farm, that green power allotment could have been bought from underutilized wind farms in southern Alberta for a lot cheaper. So we're going to not only degrade the environment, area there beside the river valley, but we're also going to end up paying more service fees and expenses for that green power than we could have buying just is green power from Alberta, the southern Alberta wind farms that currently have excess power available. I think that, I take environmental stewardship very seriously, but I don't think it should be at the expense of destroying our river valleys or increasing user and taxation upon, Edmontonians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. Ms. Rutherford, you will go next.
So environmental focus is one of my 4 key platform pillars within my platform. And so it's something I'm very passionate about. And as somebody that's young myself and has young children, it's something that I think is not just, you know, economically a great option, which I'll talk about right now, but it is also a moral imperative of our time to be addressing at all levels environmental reduction in transitioning to green energy. The energy transition strategy was approved by council in April of this year, and we need climate action on reducing those emissions from where they are now to where we need them to be by 2050, and this next 4 years is pivotal to that. There's a lot of economical advantages to being environmentally sustainable. Already, green economy brings in about $3 billion in revenue to Edmonton alone every year, and that was just in 2016. If we invest in that green energy, we can be both meeting our goals in terms of sustainability and creating good jobs and good value for people to work right here in Edmonton. So I see the interconnectedness and the opportunity in this area across the board. I also think we need to make sure we're serious about creating targets and timelines within a council term. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. Mr. Davies, you'll be responding next.
When we talk about the question, we talked about a state of emergency that's been declared by the City of Edmonton. But as well, we know that they've rolled out the Energy Transition Strategy Action Plan, which is appropriate for a low carbon and green future. What I would like to see, and to further expand upon that, is things that are more visibly from an optics standpoint. Think about prosperity. I would like to be able to go onto the City of Edmonton website, go down to the career section, and see jobs that are specifically employable from the green sector. I also know that from a fleet management perspective, the City of Edmonton is getting to a point where there's zero emissions. If it's technically feasible, I think all vehicles in the fleet should have the same requirements. And if you look at the Energy Transition Strategy Action Plan, a lot of the partnerships that are included in it are with large post-secondary institutions or big construction companies. I think we also need to look at partnerships with the smaller businesses. Make sure that, you know, the quote-unquote mom and pop shops are also having conversation and in dialogue in regards to a green future. And finally, I'd like to remind everybody that any decision that's made on City Council, they should obviously take into effect the ward, the city, but third, and we can't forget this point, a green future, the environment, and climate change.
Thank you very much. One could argue that almost every decision that City Council makes impacts climate change. In today's world, when things are changing so rapidly, we are impacted each and every day. And it is an emergency, which means it has to be a priority. And if it's a priority, you're going to put time and effort into it. You're going to invest in it. I think one of the things that we should be doing is supporting Edmontonians in building individual and community capacity to take action. I look at the Clean Energy Improvement Program, where there's a low-cost financing option for homeowners to add energy-efficient upgrades or add renewable energy installations to their property. I think it's really important that everybody is engaged in this work, whether you're a homeowner that wants to buy a net zero house or you want to make your home more efficient. But it's not just enough for individuals. We need businesses to be engaged. We need post-secondaries to be engaged. But we also need community leagues to engage. Inglewood community has solar, I believe, on the roof. Making changes in every community, and the city needs to lead by example, making sure that we are retrofitting all of our buildings to be as energy efficient as well. It also talks about transportation. making sure that we have multiple modal transportation and that we do a better job of linking it. So you can ride your bike to an LRT station, you can lock it up if you wish, and go on your way. So we have to be more efficient in our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslinger. Our penultimate question will be on the topic of policing. The police budget makes up 16% of the city budget and is projected to grow by 22% between 2018 and 2022. Yet violent crimes have increased 20% in the last 5 years. If elected, would you redirect some of the police budget to other programs and services that will provide more value for the city, or what police line items would you change to provide a more effective and responsible police service for Edmontonians? Bev Eslinger, you will be responding first.
Thank you very much. We've heard last year through many conversations and the experiences of Edmontonians about their relationship with the police. We understood very clearly how it was impacting their lives when we had many of those involved with Black Lives Matter. We heard firsthand testimony of things that need to change. Immediately, we had a community well-being task force committee that was started to people with lived experience to make recommendations to City Hall. Gaps were identified. There was areas that needed improvement, training. And I guess for me, when I look at that, because it's a formula-based item is how we fund police, is on a formula, I voted that we would look at that formula and need to understand where it needs to change. For me, I look at it in the areas that I would change is in how we respond to people. First and foremost, we need to respect all people and treat every person with dignity, regardless whoever they are. And I think as we train our officers, as we retrain our officers, that we need to look at different ways to respond. A number of our claims are mental health claims, people that have mental health issues, and police are responding because we have no one else to respond. I think we need to be more inventive. We need to find, maybe it's outreach workers that go with a police officer to those calls. I think we're going to have to really understand how we're spending our money. And I think one area we also need to improve on it is capital request. We don't always need the latest and greatest. We need efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslinger. Next on the subject of policing, we will hear from Mr. Zatz.
The issue of policing and funding police services has been, a heated topic, as Bev had mentioned, in our city for the last year or two, or beyond that, but specifically in the last year or two. I believe that the slogan, defund the police, doesn't accurately represent the intentions of the reasonable people that are advocating for more social support. I think most Edmontonians realize that our social services are woefully underfunded by our province right now. However, I do think that our amazing police service could use some support from people that are trained in social supports, and I believe that EPS would welcome that assistance. I do not believe that turning this issue into a funding decision is productive nor supportive of the great Edmonton police officers that we have in our service and that work to keep our city safe every day. I've spent my career facilitating large organizations to find efficiencies and find ways to direct their funding to their most critical services, and that certainly is the frontline policing from EPS. I believe that there are many concerns and that there's many problems within EPS, but if we need more officers on the front lines, and I believe that we do, I think that we should be looking at supporting those budget needs and helping EPS find efficiencies within their organization in order to direct more funding to the front lines of that service. If we need more social supports on certain calls, let's step up and help EPS with that goal. Let's facilitate them in their goal of keeping our communities safe. We all want a safer city, and I think we've all noticed more people in our backyards and crime rising. Downtown and transit has been unsafe, and I believe that we require more investment in EPS and more social service support for them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Zatz. Next on this question, we will hear from Ms. Rutherford.
Thank you so much. In short, my answer is yes. 60% of calls to police currently are not crime-related. They're distress calls, they're mental health, people in active suicide, and they're not criminal in nature. So we are using a hammer in this project to deal with things that are not needing a hammer as a tool to fix. And so when we only invest in one tool in our community, we're not actually going to solve the problem or create a project that is going to work for everyone. I heard on the doors, I had a woman crying, talking about the trauma she experienced when she was actively suicidal, and had the police intervene in a way that made her even more traumatized and more mentally unwell. It is a serious problem. And if those 60 calls were going somewhere else, wouldn't that mean that the police have greater capacity to deal with the crime, the real issue of crime and safety? Like violent crime and gangs and those things that we're seeing a lot of. Right now, there's $400 million that's spent on Edmonton Police Services, and in juxtaposition, there's $22 million spent on community social services. I also want to highlight that when I did my research, our budget for Edmonton Police is 16% higher than Calgary's. So I ask myself, what is going on there? I believe that we need to value and appreciate the police and the work they do, but we need the police to be able to do their work and have other supports to do the work that is not crime-related. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. And rounding out this question, we will have Mr. Davies.
The EPS is a fundamental foundation for the City of Edmonton. We need it for the protection of property, community safety, and a variety of other services. However, there's this dichotomy that's occurring that as we witnessed from the social movement of the George Floyd murder to countless examples of racism and excessive use of force on social media. So when we talk about the police budget, there's an urgency to get it right. And the way to do that is to recenter the idea of justice. I believe that if we can integrate social services into operations, we will be looking at a new future. Think about a world where a constable works a 12-hour shift with a registered nurse with training within the EPS and also specialization in mental health. I also think we need to look at the analytics of evasive uses of force that did not require firearms. When you have consistency and stability within the police budget, you get back to equality, which is the basic principle of the law.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. To round out our forum tonight, we are going to finally finish with a question regarding COVID and health. Although public health is provincial jurisdiction, throughout the pandemic, the city has taken administrative steps and enacted bylaws to proactively protect residents. If elected, and if COVID infection rates in Edmonton remain high, what actions would you encourage council to take regardless of decisions made by the province? To begin, we will hear from Mr. Mark Davies.
There are 3 bullet points that are unassailable when it comes to reducing the transmission of COVID: vaccinations, social distancing, and masks. I think these 3 approaches always need to be at the forefront of the discussion and on the table if infection rates remain high. From a personal standpoint, I'd like to see more education put out by the City of Edmonton, education that combats the misinformation that we see on a daily basis. And I also believe that that information needs to be correct, relevant, and targeted towards certain demographics that don't understand the severity of the situation. I'd also like to see partnerships with technological companies that are doing things such as the do-it-yourself kits out of vending machines. Right now, we see that our healthcare system is taxed to the limits, and if we can get to a point where there's accessibility and availability of a saliva test, and you can get your test more urgently and isolate much quicker, we will obviously be able to continue the fight against COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Next, we will hear from Ms. Rutherford.
So I think often politicians use the term jurisdiction as a bit of a scapegoat, because when I know the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, and one thing that it says in there, and we've seen this as with the mass bylaw, and we've seen it with conversion therapy bylaws, is that municipalities have a responsibility to community well-being. If our community is not physically healthy, we are not a well community. So I believe that the city can and should have a role in public health. And a lack of movement at the provincial level should not mean that we also do no movement. I talked about I demonstrated courage by showing that when the mass bylaw was rescinded in July or June, I would have made a different decision. I would have voted to keep it and have been a little bit more thoughtful in how we ease back on that. And I think that what I've learned in my experience in social planning is that this yo-yo constant, we can gather, now we can't gather, we can wear masks, now we can't wear masks, is really confusing. It makes it hard to comply with the health orders when you don't even know what they are. And so I think that for me, it's about being prudent in how we start to back away from some of the restrictions we have. And I think that what's also really important to note is that it's hard right now to know what I would do in November when the context is changing so rapidly with COVID from week to week, from day to day. But I do know that I will listen to public health experts and immunologists, and I will make sure that whatever is within the sphere of influence of municipalities will and can be done.
Next, to speak to the COVID issue, we have Ms. Eslinger.
Thank you. My hope is we don't have to go down this road and make those decisions. But I think some of the challenges that we are facing, for example, is many cities in Canada have public health officers on staff. We don't. I think if we are going to continue to address public health, we need to have our own officials, because some of the information is conflicting that we're receiving from the experts. In July, they said if you make this decision now, we can make it in 5 days. It'll have no negligible effect. But we didn't have the option of saying, what if it got worse? So I think it's challenging because the information is constantly changing. Perhaps we've had our own experts. We would be better informed. Someone that could help us navigate those challenging items. I think vaccinations are key. And in order to get more people vaccinated, I think we're going to have to say, can the city play a bigger role? Maybe we turn some of our transit buses into mobile vaccinations units and let them go around the city and help. One of the things that Calgary has done is added enforced restriction exemption on all non-essential businesses, because that's what their business community wanted. To date, our community hasn't asked for that. But I think we should be ready, in case they do, to step up if necessary. Well, we have limited authority sometimes to do things. The greater challenge is enforcement. So I think we have to continue to use the resources we can to make the biggest impact, to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eslinger. And our final speaker in the formal part of our evening will be Mr. Zutz.
Yeah, I spoke a little earlier about why I decided to run. I'm not sure if the folks that are tuned in quite caught that or not, but I didn't decide to run to solve a worldwide pandemic. Unfortunately, that's been foisted upon us over the last 18 months, and it's become a really contentious issue, as I'm sure everybody is aware. I'm unqualified to make medical decisions. I don't have any experience in the field, and I'm reading the same articles and social media posts as everybody else. And I think that we really need to depend and rely on our experts in this area. I will agree with Bev that the city doesn't employ a medical officer, and that it is really difficult and unfair to expect 13 elected officials. I don't know if they all don't have a background in medical experience, but they're certainly not on the forefronts of that sort of information and data and communication right now. So I am hesitant to pre-commit to any specific actions on hypothetical situations that may or may not be occurring in the future. I do think that the city has a role to step up and ensure that our economy, businesses, community spaces and public spaces are adequately protected from COVID. And if the province is dropping the ball or not stepping up to the plate, there is a role for the city to play there. However, I want to make it clear that I will stop at making vaccinations an essential requirement for our essential services. I don't want to lead a city council or be a member, of a city council where we are forcing our homeless people to choose between vaccines and freezing to death on our streets as one example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zutz. All right, candidates, this is the portion of the evening where you will each be given 3 minutes to make a closing statement, if you so choose to use the whole time. We will be doing this in alphabetical order, so Mr. Davies, you will be going first.
Once again, this will probably be my last opportunity to talk. Well, it is my last opportunity to talk. So I'd like to thank everybody that put this together, from the technicians to the organizers, to the moderators, to the timer. And I could certainly tell through the chain of emails that there was a lot of thought put into this forum tonight. And for me personally, that made me feel really comfortable and excited for the opportunity. I want to tell a little bit of a story about his name's Dex, and I met him in the neighborhood of Wellington during the hot summer months. And Dex and I spoke for probably about half an hour. And, when you're canvassing, you often feel like you have a rhythm and you need to get to the next door. But I was really intrigued with Dex, and he told me his life story and some of his personal issues. And I said after the half hour, I said to him, I was like, Dex, we didn't actually talk about any city issues. And Dex said to me, Mark, what are you talking about? We just spent the last half hour. You know everything about me. You are ready to represent me. So I'd like to remind people that I would be making decisions on city council on the behalf of everybody in the ward. I always give out my phone number, my cell number. It is my public number. If you want to go for coffee or tea, I will always make the time. And I want to be able to build a rapport with everybody that lives in the ward. And, I don't think it's unreasonable to always have communication elevated and most of all, take the time to talk to people. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Our next closing statement will come from incumbent councillor Bev Esslinger.
Thank you. I too want to take a chance to thank the moderator, the organizers, and all of you that came out this evening, and everyone that's watching it online tonight or later. It's really important for democracy for us to be able to gather, ask good questions. I've been in many forums, and this is the first time I got the questions in advance, and it's been really well organized, so thank you ever so much. My priorities are very simple. Jobs in the economy. We need to find ways to grow our economy, support our local businesses, and embrace innovation. Business growth and infrastructure both create jobs. I also want to focus on safety. I want to build a city where anyone can go wherever they want and feel safe. It's not like that at the moment. We've seen challenges on LRTs in various public spaces, and we need to improve that. Racism, hate, and violence do not belong here. As a community, we need to come together and make those changes. The third area is about community. People are at the heart of what we do. In fact, that's why I chose to run in the first place, was to help people. And there's nothing more fulfilling than be able to help someone in a complex problem or a simple problem to get resolution. Our city plan is built around people because that's what our residents told us. As people, we like to be connected. We want to belong. We also like to be valued and respected. That's the city that I want to be a part of. You know, and as I was thinking tonight as we are answering the questions, you know, it's great to have dialogue. It's great to hear, but it's ongoing dialogue that's important. That's what I'm committing to continue to work with each and one of you. I often host community leaders meetings, ward meetings, trying to get at specific issues, whether it was gathering with the police. We did one in person and one online. But people want answers. We need to come together to find them. We're in challenging times, but together I believe we can build a bright future. I believe that my experience, knowledge, and commitment to the city and her people would serve you well as your city councillor for Ward in Inglewood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eslinger. Ms. Rutherford, you will be going next.
Thank you so much again. I'm going to echo the sentiments of my colleagues that have gone before me, candidates that have gone before me, in terms of thanking all of the organizers for this opportunity to have this forum. You know, I really want to highlight, I was thinking about what do I want to say in my last 3 minutes. I think it's clear from the answers tonight that I am the progressive choice for this ward. I think it's clear that I have done this work for the last 15 years. I've brought stakeholders in all levels of government, in business, in nonprofit, and general citizens together to address issues like poverty and homelessness, work on positive child and youth development, and advance inclusion and reconciliation work. I've also worked on infrastructure projects, policy development, and municipal budgeting. I'm the real deal. I'm ready to work for you, and I will work hard every day. I also want to highlight a few things that were brought up that I think are really important to mention, is that I think we need a councillor this round that really appreciates the interconnectedness and the complexity of the world we're about to embark on, and have already started. So for example, Medicine Hat ending homelessness. The context in Medicine Hat was 80 people. The context in Edmonton is over 3,500 people. So the same level of funding is not going to create the same outcomes in Edmonton as it did in Medicine Hat, let alone that narrative is now a fallacy because, again, as I mentioned with that example of the flow in and out, they ended homelessness, they had enough housing, and then more people became homeless. So I think we do really need to look at leaders that can understand the complexity and the challenges we're about to face. And as I've mentioned in my intro that I think was not recorded or people didn't hear, bridge those differences. Understand and appreciate through compassion, collaboration, empathy, and listening. I am that leader. I'm ready to be that leader, and I'm excited for the opportunity to be a strong voice for this ward. I'm proud of being a resident of Ward in Inglewood, and I will bring that pride and that humility in serving you to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rutherford. And finally, last word goes to you, Mr. Tyler Zutz.
Sure. Thank you. Everyone's went on and on, or not on and on, sorry. But everybody's thanked the volunteers and everybody that's put this together. I know that COVID created a lot of additional challenges and hurdles to get over. So I'm really appreciative of bringing this together because I think an open forum like this is a positive contribution to democracy and everybody that lives in the ward. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in as well. We did maybe have a little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning, so I've heard. So I'll just recap on my vision for the city is to develop an engaged electorate that doesn't feel ignored. And I think that's what we have right now in Ward and Inglewood. I've been hearing a lot of that sentiment, and I would like to correct that as my number one commitment to the residents of this ward. I want to empower communities and community leagues to improve their communities and build vibrant and inclusive spaces for everybody to enjoy our quality municipal services. But something we didn't get an opportunity to talk about too much tonight is the economy. And that is a key driving force in being able to afford to pay for quality municipal services and expand the quality of those services that we deliver to Edmontonians. I believe that my experience in the business field of owning and operating my consulting company for the past 16 years really gives me great perspective on how those communities and economic interdependencies, support our city. And I'd like to, expand upon that a little bit further, as we didn't have time to talk about it tonight. If you're tuning into any, social media or anything like that, I'll be talking about the economy over the next 19 or 20 days. I'd also like to point out that I've been working really hard to run an independent campaign. Campaigning is extremely difficult. We've accepted zero support, endorsements, money, or help from big business, from lobby organizations, from MLAs, from provincial parties. We're running completely independent with no encumbrance or influence from any of those. And I believe that having an independent municipal council that doesn't have political allegiances and party alliances is important, because a big part of municipal services is ensuring that our city council is also holding our provincial and federal governments to account to get that funding that we need for our quality services. So I do have to wrap up here. I see the yellow card. I want to get our economy back up and running, and I thank everybody for their time tonight. Thank you very much.
Alrighty. First and foremost, to those of you who have been joining us online, I'd like to extend our sincere apologies for some technical issues off the top. That being said, this event is run entirely by volunteers, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for putting this on. So on behalf of myself as a moderator, Daryl and Arlene, and Catherine, who's not with us tonight, from the Inglewood and Woodcroft and Sherbrooke Community Leagues, who have co-sponsored this event, to our technical crew, Sam and Nolan and Sasha, thank you so much for all of your work tonight. The video will stay, or what we have of the video, will stay online at the Sherbrooke Community League YouTube page. Feel free to share it. And check out all of the candidates' websites for more information. I'm going to remind you all that Election Day is October 18th. Advance voting is going to be open from October 4th to 13th, including on Thanksgiving Monday. And information on that can be found at the City of Edmonton website. So, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and good night, everybody.